Now, just to be sure, everyone can hear me clearly, correct? Okay. Welcome to today's Cavern tour, everyone. And today's tour revolves around the guilds and the pubs that are devoted to them, as well as the Watchers Pub. Mirfak is running late in getting home, apparently, but he's thankfully set up the bot to where we can issue it commands to go to the various pubs we need to get to until he gets here. The Denis guilds were the major economic and social engines of Denis society. After the abdication of King Kareth, 5 guildmasters were appointed to become a city council. This was a new system of government that Kareth developed and used to replace the monarchy. The council technically was a regency that was to rule Denis until the coming of what Kareth called the true Great King. Kareth had been raised by his mother to believe that King Alcindar, who had previously been given the title of the Great King, was not the one mentioned in the prophecies of Urpa, which was where they had that particular legend from. Memberships in the major guilds were usually restricted to the rich and the noble, but it was possible for both men and women to join minor guilds and after completing 15 years of primary education. Male children of members of the major guilds were automatically granted entrance. Such children were taken from their families and inducted into the guild at the age of 4, and they were then schooled by the guild until they became apprentices. Female children were not eligible for membership in the major guilds, although they could join a minor guild after the normal 15-year education period. There were 18 major guilds established after Denis was founded. This was based on the guild structure of the Rhone people that they had split off from. The Guild of Writers was the most prestigious of the major guilds because of the ability to create ages was thought of as both a great privilege and an equally great responsibility. Guild laws and organization helped ensure that all writers were trained to follow the rules thought necessary to write ages that were both stable and safe. When the Denis moved to the Cavern, setting up the Guild of Writers was one of their first priorities, even before the construction of the Temple of Yavo, and it came second only to the building of the Great Zero. The Writers' Guild buildings were completed on the 8th year of the Denis era, and that would have been around 7649 BC. The opening of the guild was a cause for celebration. Forever after, the anniversary of the opening of the Writers' Guild Hall was a day of note on the Denis calendar. The construction of the last of the 18 major guild halls was completed in Denis year 100, and they were then dedicated to the service of Yavo on the Denis date Linovu 18, which was April 8th, 7556 BC. The event was called the Day of the Circle and was a holiday for the Denis Empire forever after. Guilds were ruled by a Grand Master. There were many guild masters who supervised the lower ranks or were assistants of the Grand Master. Below the guild masters were the guild captains. And then the rank and file membership was made up of the guildsmen and the guild apprentices. When King Kareth abdicated, he formed his regency government out of 5 Grand Masters from the 18 major guilds, who were in turn elected by the 18 guilds. However, in time, it was decided to expand the council so that there was that all of the 18 major guilds were represented equally. Each of the 18 guild council seats were filled by a master who was elected from his guild to represent them. Only one of the guild masters from a guild was elected to the council. The original 5 seats that had formed the council were kept, but the Grand Masters who held them were required to retire from their guilds, and instead were given the title Great Lord. When a Grand Master was elevated to Great Lord, a new Grand Master was appointed to replace him. The Great Lords were still often referred to as Grand Masters of their guilds, but that was an honorary title rather than one with any real authority. Their actual title was simply Great Lord, and they no longer had any authority over the former guilds except what was due them out of respect and reverence. When a Great Lord died, a replacement could come from any of the 18 major guilds. At the time that Anna discovered Denis, the Great Lords were alumni of the guilds of writers, miners, books, ink makers, and maintainers. How replacement Great Lords were chosen, whether it was by seniority, age, popularity, or some kind of vote, is not clear from what we currently know of Denis history. As a guess, it was probably a vote of other council members, but that could be wrong. There are a number of significant events that took place during Denis history which involved the guilds. First off, in Denis year 1124, King Mararon decreed a number of major revisions to the educational system. Common schools in the various residential districts were placed under the authority and guidance of the Guild of Legislators. The number of years of compulsory education was increased from 6 to 15, after which students could enter one of the newly established minor guilds. In year 1975, King Maerta attempted to change the Writers' Guild oath that had been written by King Ailesh, the second king of Denis. Maerta's mother, Jolatha, attempted to make the guild swear to serve the interests of the throne rather than the interests of the Denis people as a whole. Grandmaster Writer Tremal objected and was assassinated. This caused the Writers' Guild members to close ranks and refuse to change the oath. In Denis year 2350, the Guild of Miners, who were a minor guild up to that point, were encouraged by King Hemelin to innovate and improve their methods and technologies for extracting ores, creating building materials, and excavating new living spaces. In 2488, they completed successful tests of a new technology called stone extrusion. This was considered to be so important that the guild was raised from minor to major status. However, that caused a bit of a problem in that you could only have 18 major guilds. So in order for the miners to be raised, another guild had to be lowered. In order to maintain that 18 guild limit, the major guild of fine artists was dissolved and its members were split into the minor guilds of sculptors, artists, actors, and musicians. Not only was this not protested by the Guild of Fine Artists, but it was actually welcome because the split benefited them, strangely enough. Up until that point, the various arts had to compete within their own guild for funding and patronage. By splitting them up into minor guilds, each branch of the fine arts gained its own funding, hierarchy, and patronage instead of having to compete for it. In Denis year 2504, the guild council chambers were completed. The new hall was constructed atop the tomb of the great king, making the tomb barely visible. The new council chamber included a hidden vault where King Nagin stored much of the royal treasury. When the Guild of Miners were elevated to major guild status, they began building a new headquarters for themselves. In 2580, the new facilities were completed using extrusion technology. This was appropriately the first use of the method. In 2916, the Mechanist Guild expanded on the work of the miners and developed industrial extrusion. This was a refining of the technology that led to improved construction methods such as unistructural buildings, a technique in which large stone expanses were joined almost seamlessly. In 3500, women became eligible for minor guild educations for the first time in either Denis or Rhône history. This enormous stride forward in the status of women in Denis society took a heavy blow in 3523 when Queen Shama, the wife of King Tiamel, successfully convinced the guild council not to allow women into the major guilds. This was strange because Shama had actually been a proponent who had pushed through the idea that they should be allowed into the minor guilds. In Denis year 3961, the Minor Guild of Illusionists was established. Reliema, which means the unseen in Denis, were simultaneously created as a secret state police agency, and the Illusionist Guilds was used as the cover of the organization. In Denis year 4721, the major guilds were forced to accept some students who had passed entrance exams but who could not afford their ever-growing membership fees. In 4826, the first scholarship students of the Guild of Stonemasons devised an early fusion compounding technology which proved to be the first step towards the invention of Nara, a synthetic stone with that had 30 times the density of steel, and which eventually was used to coat and reinforce excavation sites, tunnels, and some buildings. In 5043, Master Faresh was appointed as the head of the Illusionist Guild by King Lablashan. His real purpose was to clean up Reliema, which had gained a poor reputation regarding the ways it conducted its operations. Faresh began the construction of a mansion of illusions on Katha Island, which came to be known as the Mystery House, and which also eventually became the headquarters of Reliema. In 5236, Derathini was first produced in the lab by the Guild of Stonemasons. Derathini was a lightweight stone product that was molecularly altered for strength and was another step on the path to the creation of Nara. In 5307, Nara, the hardest of all Denis stones, was produced in the lab by the guilds of stonemasons and miners in a cooperative effort. In 5473, Derathini was adopted and used by the Maintainers Guild to construct improved body armor and armored environmental suits. This allowed riders to be more experimental with their ages since maintainers were better protected. Darethini was used to completely cover heavy environmental armor for the first men to enter a new age, and was also used in the helmets and armor plates on their normal work suits. And finally, in 6970, which would have been 687 BC, construction began on a new guild council hall, further burying the tomb of the great king. That was the last major event in the history of the guilds before the fall of Denis. Okay, now I'm going to pause here to take questions, so let me take a look here. Kiara, probably, you probably could, but it would have been difficult because the guilds, both major and minor, formed the background of, or the backbone of Denis society, and there were guilds for almost every field of endeavor you could imagine. There was even a guild devoted to burial workers. The burial workers were the people who were responsible for preparing the body of a dead Denis, holding services for him, and they maintained a number of their own ages, which were used strictly for the purpose of burying the dead. Okay, any other? Yep, any other questions? Which is appropriate. We're going to be talking about them next. First off, the pub that we're in at the moment probably did not exist at the time of the Denis Empire. Instead, it may have been constructed by the DRC for the modern versions of the guilds. The reason why we make a guess for about that is because there is a pub for the Guild of Greeters, which we know did not exist during the Denis era. All of the guilds had formal robes that they wore during special occasions or when they needed to look impressive, and that included an overcloak, which is what you see when you visit the ages of Eder Kemo and Eder Delen. There is a floating sculpture in each, and the overall shape of that sculpture is of a Denis man in guild robes. So that's roughly what the capes look like. Another example is when you go to Eder Kemo and look at the baroglyph next to the gate there. You'll also see people dressed up in what look like Denis guild robes. The robes were colored according to the official colors of each guild. In the case of the Guild of Messengers, that was yellow with matching yellow trim. Historically, the Guild of Messengers managed all communications, both government and civilian, specific to the city and to the other ages. All evidence points to the task as having been a huge responsibility and one not easily accomplished. With an empire that spread across hundreds or perhaps thousands of worlds in different dimensions, a radio or telephone system connecting it all was impossible. That meant that a simple delivery man carrying a letter, newspaper, or proclamation was the only practical means of spreading information across the ages. And it meant that the Guild of Messengers were the glue that held the empire together. Korovev, you may want to help me out with a little bit because I wasn't able to find an awful lot of information about your guild and its history. What I know about them is the modern Guild of Messengers arose out of a collection of explorers who were interested in spreading news and communications to other explorers, and became recognized as the community as an important way to get information around to other people. It did so by means of volunteers who would roam around announcing events, news, and passing prepared key messages to people who were interested. Today, the group is still semi-active and maintains a website where they can have a calendar of events. They do not at the moment have members working in the game, but they do have plans to become active again when the current problems with new account creation have been solved. Korovev, do you have anything that you can add to that about the history of your guild? Okay. In that case, does anyone have any question about this? Something I should mention is that the major guilds in modern times were actually conceived and encouraged by the DRC. You can find their messages about it in the neighborhood of Carell, where you can collect shirts that give you access to these pubs through Nexus. The fans back during that time, which would have been around 2002 and 2003, did pick up on the idea and form fan guilds. Okay, any questions before we move on? That's not quite true, Boywith. There are actually a number of different fan guilds, and most of which are inactive these days, but some of whom still are. It was just the five guilds in Carell that were conceived of and encouraged by the DRC/Cyan. For instance, there was a guild of linguists, there was a guild of researchers, and that's just two that come up off the top of my head, which of course do not have official recognition or guild pubs. We'll be talking about that one, KR. So hang on that with that question, because I may answer it as part of my normal speech. As a matter of fact, that's where we're going to be going next. Korovev, remember that the Guild of Linguists that existed during the time when the game was live is not the guild that is currently existing. The original guild more or less disbanded, and many of their websites disappeared, and other fans have basically taken up the title. That's right. The Guild of Instructors is another example of a guild which was not created by the DRC, but which explorers came up with on their own. And there's another one. There was a historic Guild of Healers as well, and there was also a Guild of Linguists historically in the time of the Denis. Historically, the Guild of Healers, one of their, in addition to, oh, hang on just a sec. Okay, that's for somebody else. Historically, the Guild of Healers, in addition to caring for health of the citizens of the Empire, was also involved in the creation of new ages. The Guild of Healers was one of the groups that went in after the Guild of Maintainers approved an age, and their job there was to examine the environment to make sure that there were no biological or chemical hazards that might affect people visiting the age. And they were also responsible for making sure that that age contained no diseases that might spread back to the rest of the empire. The Guild of Sleepers, I'm not as familiar with them as I am with some of the other ones, but that was always a joke. Say, although they do have a website. Okay, let's go ahead and move on with the tour. Uh, Everyone select Mirabot from your buddy list and then tell him two greeters. I didn't notice when Mirfak snuck in on us. Thank goodness you're here. Okay, and I actually messed up a little bit. Something that I was going to point out back when we are in the Messengers Guild pub, and was that if you had looked up at the banners that are hanging from the ceiling, and you can do that here in this room. Just go to first person view and then look up. You'll notice that there is a symbol at the bottom of the banners, which is the guild symbol, as well as that symbol appearing in carvings along the walls. In the Messengers pub, on the walls, you will see the symbol of the Guild of Messengers, which is an open linking book. However, if you look at the banners in that pub, you will notice that they have the hand symbols of the Guild of Greeters hanging from with the Messengers colors. Why that banner was messed up in that way is something that's never been answered. This, of course, is the guild pub for the Guild of Greeters, which did not exist during Denis times. Their colors were green with green trim, although these days it's basically all you can get is a green t-shirt from Corel. Historically, there was no Guild of Greeters, so there never was an actual guild robe for them. The modern history of the Guild of Greeters goes back to 2003 during the beta testing of Uru Live. The Myst community manager for Ubisoft, whose name was Ron Miners, thought that it would be important to have a dedicated group of players to welcome new people into the community when the game went public. The group was to give newcomers hints about playing the game and assist them on request. Miners presented the idea to both Cyan and Ubisoft, and both companies liked it. Miners then wrote up a mission statement and contacted an explorer named Tajara, whom he felt was highly regarded by other players. He asked her to lead the new group. She then approached explorers named Ailey, Dave III, Doug Chugger, Jenny H., Lorette, Cheyenne, and 2 as 1, and got the new, and with them, they prepared to get the guild set up and ready for the launch of Uru Prologue. They then approached other beta testers and got together a group of 100 to be the greeters. They chose other beta testers since, of course, they were familiar with the game as it existed up to that point and would be able to assist with the public launch. The beta test group then helped refine the role of the guild and chose the guild symbol that you see on the walls around us. This had been they had selected that symbol from several designs that had been submitted by members of their group. The greeters were a very successful project during Prologue. However, that wasn't to last throughout the history of the game being live. Instead, a kind of love-hate relationship with the rest of the community grew up between them. Much of that was due to misunderstandings, partially brought on by the perception that they were getting special privileges from Cyan. The most obvious of the privileges were the special T-shirts that they were allowed to wear. Most explorers liked the job they were doing, but because of this perception that they were getting privileges, there was resentment as well. The original greeters stood regular shifts in the Guild of Greeters neighborhood, which was created specifically for them and pinned to the top of the list so that it never moved. The greeters also wandered around to other locations, such as new neighborhoods, to find players that might need help. Being a member of the Guild of Greeters, Bevan didn't make one a member of the guild. Instead, you had to fill out an application and then show proficiency in a number of knowledge tests. After the 2007 closing of the Cavern, most of the active greeters moved on to other hobbies or games, and the guild leadership lost interest in maintaining the guild or inducting new members. While in theory the guild still exists today, in practice it's dead, and none of the shards ever picked up on the idea of organized greeting. When Uru was reopened by Cyan in 2010, the guild still existed on paper, and a few former guilders returned, but they never made a serious attempt to reorganize and revive the guild. There is still a website to this day dedicated to the guild, which contains a lot of helpful information. And there is, of course, even after the server crash from some time ago, a neighborhood dedicated to the group pinned to the top of the list in Nexus. However, it is impossible for anyone to join the guild anymore, since their last leadership group never passed on control of it to anyone else when they abandoned the game. There have, since the reopening of the Cavern, been several attempts to form new greeter guilds, but none have met with much success because none of the members have been willing to stand regular shifts the way the original guild did. Does anyone have any questions about this?
Larry, there are two people who do man the Guild of Greeters Monday through Saturday. That's Itelka, and I'm trying to remember the other person's name. Andrew Yoso.
Yes, that's actually been something that various people, including myself, have taken up over the years. Uh, there was a time when, for 2 years straight, that I also functioned or worked as a volunteer greeter. But it's more or less of an individual effort. Uh, I was basically saying that no group that tried to reform the Guild of Greeters concept and become an organized group has ever succeeded in doing so, because they couldn't get people to actually man shifts in the Guild of Greeters hood. At most, the majority of them would simply occasionally log in whenever they felt like it, walk around some of the new neighborhoods, and then and perhaps Agra Island, and answer questions if somebody happened to ask one out loud without actually identifying themselves as being there to help. So on the other hand, there are a few volunteers who would occasionally go around and ask and announce that they were there to give help if anyone needed. But again, those people never really stood shifts. So while there's still people willing to help these days, it's not an organized effort. Yes, Ro, you probably should see a doctor about that. The original Guild of Greeters would have been recognizable because they had T-shirts, which they got to choose the color of the shirt when they were first given it, but it had in the center of the chest and on the back the two-hand symbol that you see here in the pub. Anyone since then would have been a volunteer greeter. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Okay. The next hood that the pub that we're going to want to visit is the Cartographers. So the command to Mirabot will be 2 Cartographers. This guild actually had something of an interesting history. First off, historically, the cartographers' robes were turquoise with turquoise trim. And the cartographers were one of the groups that followed the maintainers into a new age, along with the Guild of Surveyors. The Guild of Surveyors were there to establish the main north-south line called the Zero Meridian of a new age. And once they had done so and established the coordinate system in that age, the cartographers would map the new ages as well as maintain the maps on a consistent basis. Most evidence points to the maps done by the cartographers as being extremely comprehensive and often include ocean floors, underground water sources, geography, and many other things besides. In modern times, although the Guild of Cartographers was one of the groups that was conceived of and encouraged by the DRC, it was not actually picked up as a formal guild by the explorers until December 2003, when an explorer named Patrick the Photographer decided that there was a need for it. Patrick would eventually be informally elected as the guild's first Grand Master, but the guild was more or less informal and loosely organized throughout its history. The guild used the Uro-Obsession website, which was a very popular website for much of the history of the game. And its forum was where the Guild of Cartographers would hang out and communicate with each other. Uro-Obsession was closed in 2011, and many people mourned the loss of that site. The motivation or need for the Guild of Cartographers came from the enormous area that the Denis Ages cover. Uro created a new experience for explorers who were used to playing Myst games, which was the new experience was the fact that they could talk to other explorers in real time. Explorers attempting to tell others about various locations and travel routes they had found were finding it difficult to accurately describe them. While they could escort people to places that they had found, it was troublesome, and the names that they used for different areas were simply whatever that individual found unique about the place. Needless to say, there was little, if any, consistency. Different names were often applied to the same place, or similar names might be applied to different places. This caused a great deal of confusion throughout the community. There were a few known Denis place names, and the Guild of Linguists was translating those names. At the same time, the Guild of Researchers was attempting to discover new place and building names. Many accurate place names eventually became available, but there was a problem in that they were unknown to the general community and to new explorers. So the Guild of Cartographers began applying those available names to maps that they would create themselves, and they published them on their own website in an attempt to simplify describing locations and to reduce the overall confusion. They used the same method that we use now in the age of Minkata if you're trying to solve the puzzle there. They would use their keys to establish a direction and then use pacing by counting the number of footsteps their avatar took to establish distances. The guild members who were active and involved during the founding of the guild in 2004 were Patrick, Rika, ID, Moyeti Jean, Selthan, Janaran, Mackenzie, Nalates, Jack294, Miradine, Lincoln Imp, CV, and Laani. The guild itself was more or less active until April of 2008, when the Grandmaster of the guild at that time, named Aiden, disappeared from the game he took down the Guild of Cartographer website he created, which was urumaps.com. With his disappearance, and the site's death, most of the maps and research that they had done went with him. That, along with the later loss of Uro's Section, was pretty much the end of the guild as an active organization, although Guildmaster Nalates still has a website with several maps that he recovered from the other sites, and that is active to this day. PM me at some point, and if you want to know where that website is, and I'll look it up for you. The guild symbol for the Guild of Cartographers, by the way, is a protractor, one of the instruments that would be used in mapping. That same symbol, either a protractor or dividers, can be found in the symbol of the Guild of, okay, my mind just went blank. Surveyors, although it's a little harder to recognize in that particular guild symbol. Okay, any questions about that before we move on? Okay, doesn't look like there is. So the next is two maintainers. The maintainers' guild colors were burgundy with burgundy trim. And their symbol, if you've never actually looked at it closely, is an open book with an eye above it. Historically, the maintainers were the police force for the Denis Empire for anything that was outside of the caverns. In other words, anything that dealt with the writing of or use of descriptive and linking books. A book could not be used before it was approved by the maintainers. No one considered a linking book safe until it had received maintainer approval. The maintainers operated in concert with the other law enforcement agencies in the Denis Caverns, which were the City Guard, the Palace Guard, and Reliema. This is going to be a short lecture here because in modern times I have not yet been able to find any real information about the Guild of Maintainers. However, the modern Guild of Maintainers is a still active organization. The main work of the Guild is to inspect explorer-ridden ages, testing them for possible problems, both while they are being developed and after they have been released for the community to use. You can find fan ages, by the way. There's one or two fan works in the Open Cave Shard. There are also many fan ages in the UAM Shard and in a shard called Deep Island. So basically, the maintainers are modern maintainers are a volunteer group that helps beta test new ages that have been created by fans to help them identify problems. I had mentioned earlier that one of the turning points in history for the Dini was when the maintainers adopted a new material for their armor called Darathini. Darathini was highly resistant to corrosion, poison gases, or any other agent which might harm the person wearing it. And later on in the series, when we visit the age of Garrison, you'll be seeing examples of maintainers' duty armor and the environmental suits they wore when first going to a new age. Does anyone have any questions about the maintainers? As I mentioned, I do not have much information about the modern guild, so I can't really say very much about them. Desi, the modern guild is still very much active, although not so much with Uru Live. They mostly work with the shards and fan programmers who want to create their own ages. They have an active website called guildofmaintainers.org, I believe. No, restoration engineers are actual Cyan employees who come in to basically keep an eye on how the game is working. They park, for the most part, they simply park an avatar on Agra Island someplace and let it log activity. They actually are quite nice, and every once in a while, when they're actually sitting at their desk looking at the computer screen, you can sometimes talk to them. However, it's not very often that they actually pay attention to the avatar because they're doing other things, you know, like writing new games and things. You can always recognize a restoration engineer because they have a special hard hat. It is the only hard hat design that has a lantern on it. And that is reserved for Cyan's employees to use so that you can always recognize them. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. The next command is to writers. Okay, and this is a guild hall which was for a guild which during the time of the Denis was the single most prestigious guild throughout their history. The guild color was black with dark red trim. Historically, the members of the Guild of Writers were the only individuals who were officially recognized by Denis society as being qualified to write descriptive books. It was the Writers Guild that wrote all of the official ages for private enterprise, the government, and for any other guild that required an age. However, that does not mean that they were the only ones who ever wrote ages. Members of the nobility would often receive private training on how to write an age. To give you an example, the family of Atrus the Elder, the father of Gen, who is in turn the father of the Atrus who lived on Mist, his family was noted for having a few private ages that they had written themselves, and Atrus the Elder, along with his wife Anna, cooperatively wrote a private age called Gemedet. But this was sort of a hobby of the rich, and not no one who was not of the nobility would have been permitted to do so. In modern times, the Explorer Guild of Writers, as near as I can tell, probably formed sometime around September of 2007. And it operates a shard called Gen, which is 5 years old now. It was opened on February 4th of 2012. The Guild of Writers at guildofwriters.org is mainly concerned with the creation of Explorer-written ages and provides tools and advice to aid people who are interested in creating their own ages. As I mentioned earlier, shards that host Explorer ages are Deep Island, UAM, and the Open Cave. You can also, if you visit Facebook and the Uru Online group there, you will often find references to these Explorer-written ages, many of which are extremely good. The Guild of Writers symbol that you see on the wall and banners here is the nib of a pen. And later on, when we'll point it out, but when we visit Grisen, even though Grisen was an age that was owned by the maintainers, if you've ever looked around in the conference rooms there, you will see that on the walls, instead of the maintainers symbol, which you see practically everywhere else, they have the symbol of the Guild of Writers. And that's pretty much it for the guild pubs. Unless there are any other questions, or are there any questions about this or anything I've said up to this point? Okay, looks like there isn't. So at this point, uh, we are going to be going to the last of the six pubs, which is the Watcher's Pub. However, you're not, please wait for it because at this point, uh, Mirfak is going to have to tell us, either warp us there or tell us how he wants us to get there because we're going to his version of it. I'm actually surprised that everything's gone so smoothly up to this point, so we were due for some sort of technical error. By this time, last night, we'd suffered two system crashes during the tour. Okay, it looks like we're ready, so just PM link to Mirrobot. Mirfak, can you remove the curtains from the alcoves? The second floor is made up of a balcony with the corridor extending off to one side that has a shelf for books and a door leading to another room. That room was remodeled by Guildmaster Kadish and converted into a puzzle for his Path of the Shell puzzle. The third story of the building is only decorative and has no roof, leaving the structure open to the air. The third floor walls are of a smaller diameter than the lower floors, giving the building a top shaped like a bottle. The Watcher's Pub has also been called at various times the Watcher's Sanctuary, the Restoration Guild, and the Great Tree Pub. This is the only pub that is known to have existed during the time of Denis. It was once incorrectly referred to as Rolep during a mistake in translating a passage from Words of the Watcher. Rolep is actually another inhabited cavern and is one of many that the Denis spread into while expanding the city. Rolep is one of the 4 main caverns. The alcoves are now open for viewing, and the floors in them are solid, so you can go down and look if you wish to. The Watcher's Pub Lincoln Point has a key coordinate of 18,270 torans in direction, 22 shafiti in distance, and minus 48 shafiti in height below the Great Zero. That places the pub at 105 degrees from the Denis Zero Meridian, just a little south of east, and 293 feet from the Great Zero's center mark. It is also 640 feet below the Great Zero, and that places it about 600 feet above the level of the lake water. The pub was built originally to be a social center for the Denis elite, and DRC sketches show the side chambers with comfortable seats and game tables. If you look inside the alcoves now, you will see the remains of the fittings for the seats. However, the game tables and the seats themselves are gone. Currently, the pub's common library room contains a notebook about the building, which was written by Simpson, a restoration engineer who worked for the Michael Simpson, a restoration engineer who also worked on Gurisin. In addition to the notebook, there are linking books to Urkana and a linking book and Annone, the Annone Cathedral. Simpson carried a voice recorder around with him for verbal notes and to save his first impressions of places he visited. And then he transcribed his notes into books later. You can read the book for yourself at some point, but the main thrust of it is that his impression of this pub was that while there wasn't much to look at here, the place was practically dripping in history. And it's true that a number of very important events in Denis history took place here. One of the niches, or I should say the alcoves, is a short passage to a balcony that overlooks a circular chamber which contains a sculpture of a tree. And let's go ahead and go take a look at that now. This tree predates the rest of the Watcher's sanctuary, and the circular chamber that we are in is actually carved out of the side of the island, and is the only part of the pub which is actually underground. It's possible that this tree dates back as far as the Denis century 2000. Sometime after the Watcher wrote his Book of Prophecy in 4500 DE, the pub itself was built outside of this chamber in his honor as an upper-class salon. The tree is thought to be a representation of the great tree of possibilities, the conceptualization that Denis had of the multi-universe theory favored by the Rhône people of Gardernay and their descendants both on Terrany and Denis. The great tree motif appears in artwork all around Denis, such as the floor design in the Hall of Kings and the tracery down the center of the great stairs. The lights that you see around the room in a black band around its circumference are projectors, and originally projected a scene of floating clouds that changed to a nighttime star field. In the current live game, the projectors do not work, but hopefully Mirafac has them working now. Okay, unfortunately he does not. If they were working, instead of just being dark, we would be seeing a nighttime sky with stars all over the place, and that would fade into what appears to be daytime with clouds. The last owner of this building was Kadish, who had whose self-proclaimed title was the Grower. He was fascinated by the Book of Prophecy, words of the Watcher, and he constructed his puzzle in this place to try and convince other Denis citizens that he was the prophesied Grower. He set a puzzle which he called the Path of the Shell, a name which was later adopted by Yusha. Although the simple goal of his puzzle was to get over to the tree across the suspension bridge. He scattered hints to the puzzle in the ages of Annonay and Arcana, and invited Denis citizens who visited the pub to try and solve the puzzle. His claim of being the Grower resulted in a popularity boom for the pub, and people thronged to visit Annonay and see if they could solve the Path of the Shell. None of them ever managed it before the fall of Denis. Okay, here we go. Yes, he's got the projectors working. You can see it fading into nighttime now. Okay, the next place that we're going to want to go is up to the second floor and through the corridor into the puzzle room. This was as far as the average Denis visitor to the pub ever got. They would come in here, and in the gap in the wall that I'm standing next to, there was a giant stone ball, which was hollow in the center, so it was lighter than it looked. People always thought that you had to somehow get past that ball and into the passage beyond it in order to solve the puzzle. And that was classic misdirection on the part of Kadish, who was essentially the P.T. Barnum of his era. He was always making puzzles that appeared to mean one thing and meant something completely different. If anyone ever had managed to get past the stone ball, they would have walked up this spiral corridor and found a hole at the end, which dropped down into a chamber behind the clock that I'm facing. Needless to say, without knowing the trick and the purpose of the clock, you would never get out of this room. Now, this is one place where the ladder is actually safe to go up. So I'm going to climb up the ladder, and then, oh, someone's opened up the clock door. I'm going to go up the ladder and up to the top of the puzzle. You can follow me up there if you wish. However, you can also wait for me to get up there and say I'm there, and then just tell Mirobot, find Larry, and it will take you up to me. Up here at the top of the puzzle, we find a mystery machine. There's no real apparent purpose for it. It seems to have some vague resemblance to a clock of some sort, or perhaps a compass, but it doesn't actually serve any purpose other than holding a button which extends a hidden bridge. That bridge was one of the tricks that Kadish had in case anyone ever did manage to climb up here in a method that he didn't know or he wasn't expecting. If you look around up here, you will notice that Kadish put a lot of iconography and symbols on the floor and on the walls, which were things that he was quite fond of putting in hidden areas in all of his ages. These symbols were basically things that were mechanical symbols that were important to him. One of them is the four-sphere symbol that he put in many ages, and also you may have used as an inspiration when he designed Anone. Let's see if the bridge is across. Okay, no, it is not. When the mechanism is operating properly, the semicircular door that you will see across there will drop down, and a bridge will extend from the other side across to this one. It looks like we probably will not be able to see it. So let's go ahead and just walk across, and you can walk through the door and go down the stairs on the other side and across the bridge to the tree. And this was a sight that no Denis other than Kadish ever saw after he finished his puzzle, other than possibly a few construction workers. The spiral symbol that you see on the floor probably did not exist back in his day. When Yisha co-opted this particular pub as part of her Path of the Shell puzzle, the name of which she took from Kadish, she would have added this spiral because it used at one time to serve a purpose. It was a borrow gate that was hidden, and if you used it in the right way, you would wind up in Cavern. Nowadays, we have other ways of getting to Cavern, and so this particular borrow gate was disabled. Kadish, of course, would simply walk across simply solve his own puzzle and walk across the bridge, and then stand in the doorway and wave at the people standing on the balcony just to impress them and to motivate them to try to solve his puzzle. There was nothing in here for him that he actually had stored here or had anything to do once he got here. This room also used to have part of a puzzle that Yisha left behind in various places, which when put together properly gave you a special code for the fireplace puzzle in the Mist Island Library. And that's pretty much it for the tour. So are there any questions about anything that we've covered up to this point? Actually, there is one thing I was almost forgetting to talk to you about. Let's go ahead and walk back over to the main part of the pub. Make that two things I almost forgot to cover. The bottle that you see next to me, which for our purposes we'll just say that he's sleeping because he's dead tired. This bottle dates back to a chapter in Live which was called Scars. Douglas Sharper had returned to the Cavern after the hiatus and was put in charge of finding out why animals were disappearing from Negalon. When he investigated, he eventually found that renegade Baro were slaughtering the animals and driving them into near extinction in the area around the pod. At the same time, two young ladies named Rosette Taylor and Wheelie Ingberg had become trapped in Tokata 2 near the Kahlo pub. And Rosette Taylor was killed in the collapse of architecture that had dropped them down into the room in the first place. But Wheelie Ingberg survived that, although she was injured. After she was trapped there, a Baro appeared and took her linking book away from her, so she could not get out. And it sat and watched her while the DRC was trying to rescue her, and they had to dig through quite a bit of rubble first. When it looked like she was going to be rescued, the Baro ended up killing her rather than allowing her to escape. It said one word in English, which was Nolobin. It was later discovered that a survivor of the Denis named Escher had experimented on that particular Baro in the age of Nolobin, and apparently he regarded the death of the two girls as revenge. When Sharper discovered what had happened, and that the girls had died at the result of the or at the hands of a renegade Baro. He was determined to find the killer and have a bit of revenge of his own. So he brought down a hunting rifle and then went back to Negulon Island, where he tried hunting down the renegade Baro. Finding a group of them, he raised the rifle and sighted in on one of them. But just as he was pulling the trigger, one of the Baro who were friendly to explorers appeared in front of him and took the bullet that he had fired, aiming at one of the renegades. This is that Baro. His body was later brought here while Sharper was talking to explorers here in this pub, and it was left as you see it now. It was left here. They remained here as an honor guard for a time, but later just left the body here when they moved on. It was here for a number of days before they finally returned and took it away for whatever rituals the Baro may have for their dead. That was one of a very much an eye-opening event for Douglas Sharper, who later chose to go back to Negulon, but this time to join the friendly Baro and aid them in whatever way he could with the renegades. The last thing I want to talk about, we're going to see if if Mirfak is going to have any success with this. So hang on for just a sec. It was made visible just because, specifically so that you could see it. I had mentioned earlier that this pub is located in a residential district on the Agra island called Chitari. Chitari is a sprawling district that mostly consists of homes built into the sheer walls of the island around the pub, although there is also a section of it built above ground near the guild hall. Most of the streets of this district are actually tunnels. Chitari is home to a large common library for the upper classes. The district was constructed during the reign of King Jakreen and was named after his dead son. By the time of the fall of Denis, it was the custom for guild families to come to this pub for meetings to oversee the activities of the guilds in lower class districts. It was here in Chitari that Agaris, as part of his plot to destroy Denis, manipulated Veovis and Atris. As a result of his manipulations, Veovis was imprisoned on charges of murder for which he had been framed. And that action is what eventually resulted in the fall of Denis, when Veovis joined Agaris in order to get revenge of his own. When Gin, the son of Atris, first traveled to Denis, he looted the common library of Jateri of all the blank books that he could find, as well as taking a few of the completed descriptive books there to use as examples for his own writing. Now, if we can see out now, you should be able to see windows from various residences of Jateri on the cavern wall around us. Where I'm standing and in the direction where I am looking up, I can see a few of the windows, although I don't see the sides of the island as I should be. Mirfak's having problems, so if he had been able to make these things completely transparent, you would see that there actually is a cliff face surrounding the pub. We're on a ledge at the bottom of that cliff face, and there are windows up and down that are up higher on the sides of the cliff. Another thing that unfortunately we're not able to see is that in one direction you will have a clear view of the city of Denis off in the distance across the Denis Lake. Standing over where I am and looking up from near the base of the stairs, there are some more windows of the neighborhood. While we're waiting to see if he can do that, I will say that this does conclude today's tour, and I thank you all for attending and your patience with me as we worked our way through this. The next tour will be in 2 weeks, the second weekend of next month. Again, we will have a Friday tour at 2200 key time and a Saturday tour at 1300 key time. And now I will I want to thank Mirfak. This was a remarkably smooth transition between various ages or locations. So we were only 8 minutes over time, and that was mostly my fault. And then We're going to have an after-tour party, of course, and Joker is going to provide music for that, and I'll let him announce his music channel.